Hey, what's going on everybody, and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as J Monster, and I want to welcome you back to our Army Creation series. If you guys are interested in the breakdown of rosters in detail, I would recommend you go and take a look at UMAD Commander's channel. He has already finished his series, and I'm still trying to play a little bit of catch-up. But one important difference to note between this series and my previous one, and indeed UMAD Commander's series, is that I'm going to be taking a look at the test build, because as far as I'm concerned, the test build stats are the only stats you need to be concerned about. 0.97 is going to have a lot of changes. There's going to be a couple of new factions, a couple of new units, actually a bunch of new units. Dol Amroth in particular is getting some big changes, but I'm going to just continue to roll forward. I don't want to go back and revisit all of the faction videos just yet. I may go back and replace some of the videos that pertain to factions that have got a whole bunch of changes in 0.97, which is, I think, needed to keep the videos relevant. But for the time being, we're just going to move forward. And today we're going to be taking a look at Rohan, and Rohan is getting a lot of changes in the new patch. And there's some other changes that are going on that affect Rohan that aren't specifically being targeted at Rohan, which we're going to talk a little bit about. But for the time being, as is customary, take a look up there in the top right-hand corner. You can see their faction bonuses. I have trimmed them down just a little bit to make them make a little bit more sense, and some of the things are obsolete. But yeah, that's basically the gist of what Rohan gets after their stats and their based on unit size and things like that has already been applied. These are the kind of things that they get in addition to, which helps specialize them a little bit more. But yeah, without any further ado, let's take a look at some army comps. So before we begin, I think it's a good idea to talk a little bit about some of the changes that you're going to see coming to Rohan in 0.97 and how they're going to be different from how they are in 0.96. Overall, the specialization is not changing. Rohan definitely specializes in their Lancer units. And I would say also their skirmisher units. One of the builds we've seen be really frequent in the community lately is a full Rohan skirmish build, which can look something like this. This probably isn't a perfect iteration of it, because I admit I don't really play Rohan all that much. Then you'll maybe take a couple units of these Hornibrook archers and a couple units of Windshield Maidens. Maybe you'll bring some heavier lancers and things like that. But overall, this is more or less what that kind of build is going to look like. Maybe you'll bring another unit of the heavy lancers, and that's the kind of build that I've seen a lot of players use to great effect with Rohan. So this is a possibility. But let's get into some of the changes that will open up some new possibilities for Rohan as well. If you are an astute watcher, you'll certainly have noticed that a lot of the Rohan unit sizes have shrunk. Personally, I found it very, very strange that Rohan would be fielding the same amount of infantry numbers as, say, an Eastern faction. So when coming into 0.97 and taking a hard look at Rohan, I wanted to do something that would change that, to bring them a little bit more in line with a lot of the other Western factions. So 160 tends to be the standard unit size for a Western faction, like Gondor or Cardolan or Dol Amroth. Dol Amroth is a little bit smaller, but it's only about 10 men, and that kind of thing. So they've shrunk a little bit. I believe they've gotten an extra 2 skills. So they should be up to about 5 skill right now, and they have an extra point of attack as well. So these Westmark Axemen are actually pretty decent. It is worth noting that on the patch right now, we're trying out a set of changes aimed at men-at-arms in general. I know a lot of people have given us a lot of feedback about the usefulness of men-at-arms, so we are taking that into account. A lot of men-at-arms units got a +1 melee defense bonus, and some other select units like the Western Númenórean faction, so Gondor, Cardolan, Dol Amroth, Arthedain, and I think it was just those 4 factions. They got an extra point of damage in addition to that melee defense. So a lot of the men-at-arms units have gotten a lot better. Also, I say men-at-arms, that's not by any means confined only to Manish units. Some of the other Orcish factions got some fairly appropriate bonuses. So the Angmar Marauders got a little bit smaller, but they also got an extra point of melee defense. So right now they're sitting at about 4 melee defense, 4 shield, 6 armor, and about 8 attack, and 200 men in the unit with 1 extra point of morale, which brings them to 10. So they're actually quite a formidable unit now, and certainly one that is worth a little bit more, I think, than they used to be, especially with the new fatigue trait overhaul, which I think I will talk about in a different video. Maybe I'll make a large video covering a lot of the changes that are coming in 0.97 in general, just to give you guys a little bit more information about that in detail. But in any case, so a lot of the men-at-arms units, the one-handed sword and board kind of basic infantry units, have gotten a buff. For most of them, it was melee defense, but for some of the other ones, it was damage. So we move on here. We've got the Riddermark Axemen as well. They have they've gotten better. I believe they went up an extra point of damage. I think they used to be 10, now they're 11, and their skill is obviously higher than what it used to be. I think it's now 4 skill instead of 3, so it's a little bit better. But they are an axe unit, so I mean it is going to be a fair amount lower. But they are quite speedy. Actually, I'll say this right now, and then we'll get away from it and get back on topic. Speed in general has gone up across the board by 0.05, which does not sound like a lot, but it is essentially the difference between the Dwarven faction speed in 0.96.1 and everybody else operating at 1.0 speed. So it sounds like a small number, but it is actually quite significant, and you will notice the difference. And it will have an improvement on the responsiveness of your units, so that's always a good thing. And yeah, so let's move on from that. It's just a cool little detail I want to throw at you guys. Yeah, so there's other units here, shrunk as well, but their stats have gone up accordingly. The Westmark units were previously 160, and they weren't really worth a ton. But if you look at them now, it's 7 damage there on that Westmark Spearman. And a note on Spearmen as well. This is one of the changes that I was talking about earlier that not necessarily aimed solely at Rohan, but has happened across the board. Spear units have gotten an extra 2 spear bonus, and the result has been quite significant. So a lot of your spear units previously were just kind of fodder. They were just there to get in the way, and cavalry could just run them over. That is not the case any longer. Any cavalry units that comes into contact with spears, especially elite spears or higher end spears like the Westmark Spearmen, they are going to regret it. So the Westmark Spearmen, I believe, have gone up by some melee defense as well. Again, it's not reflected in the card, but if you add those numbers up, you can clearly see that, that there's some missing stats there that aren't accounted for in the card. Westmark Infantry have gone up, I believe, from 5 or 6 damage to 8 damage. They've gone down to 120 men in the unit. They've also gotten, I believe, a little bit of extra melee defense as well. So they are a quite formidable unit. If you take a look at their stats right there, it's no joke. Westmark Marshals, I think, got a little bit of extra skill, maybe. Riddermark Archers went down from like 200 to 140. But they also went up by 1 damage, which is a pretty significant change for them. So they're now considered to be mid-tier archers instead of lower end. And then they jump right from that to the higher end of things. And you got the Helmingas, who I think went down a little bit in size as well. I could be wrong about that, but I think they also got some extra stats. Yeah, they definitely are. There's at least 1 point there that's missing, and I think that went into their skill, so they should have about 4 skill. And then we move on to the Windshield Maidens. This is probably one of the most significant changes. Throwing axes, as many of you have known for quite some time now, have lost their AP in 0.97, and the reasoning behind this is the following. Javelins and throwing axes in 0.96.1 are, for all intents and purposes, the exact same kind of unit. Maybe there's some like throwing arc differences, but all in all, they're both high damage AP thrown projectiles. So I've taken some steps to try and make some meaningful differences between these units. So for example, Windshield Maidens and throwing axes are going to be very strong against heavily armored units that don't have a shield, lightly armored units that don't have a shield, and then just units without a whole ton of shield value to stop the projectile altogether. So what they're going to be weak against is units that are both heavily armored and heavily shielded. And that's where they're going to lose a little bit of ground against the javelins, at least in the same time frame. So if we're accounting for 4 volleys, which I believe javelin units each tend to have at this point, I think it's like 4 volleys. That makes some sense. So in that same time frame, javelins will do less damage against the other unit types that I mentioned earlier, but will do more damage against highly armored and highly shielded units. Throwing axes, however, have been given an extra volley, so they're now up to 5. It says 4 there, but they actually have 5, which is significant. And that actually puts them ahead of the javelins, but it does take more time, and as we know, time is everything in a multiplayer match. It could be the difference between getting that volley off and that unit getting run over by cavalry. So there is a much more meaningful difference between the 2 units now, whereas previously they were essentially interchangeable. So the dynamic has changed a little bit, but over time, throwing axes will end up having more damage, I believe, than the javelins. And this is accounting for units being attacked from the front. So getting that full shield value, protection against the missile, the throwing axes won't do as well against heavily armored and heavily shielded units. And that's units, not heavily armored units, period, but units that combine heavy armor with a heavy shield. that's what they're not going to be as useful against as a Javelin unit over the same period of time. Javelins, by consequence, have gone down by 1 point of damage, whereas throwing axes have all gone up by a single point of damage. So it ends up being an okay system. It's not one that I would say I'm entirely satisfied with. I'd like to maybe see some projectile changes to the hand-thrown projectiles a little bit more in the future. But we'll see what kind of turn that takes. In any case, moving on, we have the Metal Celled Guard. I believe they got a little bit extra shield value. I think they have 8 shields. Just like the Westmark Spearmen and the Westmark Infantry, they all share the same shield value now, so they have 8 shield. I think they got an extra point of skill as well, which would make sense. Yeah, there's definitely like 3 or so points of defense there that aren't accounted for by the card. Moving on now, we have the Eastmark Scouts, who finally have a shield value, and I think they've gotten a little bit better. Kuro, and I agree with him, is not entirely satisfied with the way that scout units work currently. So we are thinking about giving them a little bit of extra, anti-cavalry bonus in addition to some other things like fairly high melee defense and things like that. Just to make them a little bit more useful, kind of give them a niche. Like you could use them to hide somewhere and then go after some archers, and once they get into close quarters with the archers, they'll be able to do a lot better than they otherwise would. With that high melee defense, it's going to make it really, really difficult for those archers to knock them down. Missile units will still be very effective against scouts, and they're going to be lightning fast. So that's something we're going to try, and yeah, if your scouts, when you get your hands on .97, if your scouts behave in that manner, then you'll know that we've ultimately gone that direction. And of course, there will be announcements and change logs and things like that for you guys to go through, so you don't have to just completely guess. But anyway, moving on now, the Eastmark Riders, I think, are the same. Riddermark Cavalry, basically the same. A note on Lancers, 410 is pretty well going to be the baseline charge for Lancers, because we've noticed that the 3-5 Lancers aren't really worth anything. Melee defense, of course, counts against charge bonus, so lower tier cavalry has a hard time getting through the defenses of higher tier units unless they can attack from the rear. And from the front, even some of the lower tier units have enough melee defense to be able to deflect that charge quite handily. So we're going to move away from that. We're going to move towards cavalry units being a little bit more elite in general. The notion of militia horsemen not really making a whole lot of sense. Horsemen are a pretty big investment. They're expensive animals, difficult to train, difficult to acquire, and at least to train them to a standard of being serviceable for war and that sort of thing. So we're going to move away from that generally. The rest of these units here, I think the Riddermark Cavalry have gone down in morale a little bit to give some meaningful differences between them and the Aelred of Aldburg. The Aelred of Aldburg, I believe, have gotten a little bit of extra melee defense and I think 1 extra point of damage. So in when it comes down to a hand-to-hand fight, they're going to be better than the Riddermark Cavalry, although on the charge they're going to be pretty well the same. And they've also got a little bit higher morale, which is nice. Moving on to the first Marshals Bodyguard, I think they got the same treatment. I think their shield value probably went up a little bit. Yeah, but overall that unit hasn't really changed a whole lot. Sons of Eorl, I think they got an extra point of armor, but overall not a whole lot of changes being made there. Although I think they got some extra shield value. I think they now have 8 shield value, and so they've gone up to about 1,500 florins, which is average price for knights. Eastmark Horse Archers, Riders of the Fold, I don't think have really changed at all, except for the fact that each of these units is now going to be capped at 2. One of the things we are trying to move away from, and you can see it in the build that I showed you initially at the beginning of this video, is an extremely skirmish-heavy meta. We don't want to eliminate skirmish-heavy builds. There's a lot of people that enjoy that playstyle, and we respect that. But we do want to move away from it a little bit. As you may remember, about a year ago, in 0.95, we wanted to make infantry great again. And that's something that I think are still trying to achieve, and we've taken some really good strides towards that, especially in 0.97 in my opinion. So Spears is going to be more useful against Cavalry. Cavalry is going to be a little bit more limited, a little bit smaller, and Skirmishers, certain Skirmishers, like the 4 damage Skirmishers, are going to be losing a little bit of ammo and stuff like that. So we are taking some steps to make infantry more useful, and to bring Cavalry down just a little bit, in particular Skirmishers and things like that. But we still want to have those builds be open and usable for people, because we want 0.97 to last you for a little while at the very least. We've had a lot of patching coming since 0.95, which I believe released in I think it was in like June or something like that. Like, it took us a long time to get it out. We worked like definitely overtime to get it to you as quickly as possible, but it took quite a lot of effort and time. And we've been patching pretty regularly since then. But we'd like 0.97 to last you for quite some time, because we are getting down to that final leg of development, right? We want to get to 1.0, and 1.0 is, from what I understand, where development is going to cease. So 1.0 is going to be the final product. Up until now, it's just been a really extended beta. So yeah. One other big change here. Windshield Maidens, it says that they have 18 ammunition, however this has gone up to the full 32. So that unit all around is just a really nice kind of flavor unit. They also count as melee cavalry, and yeah, so now they're a full-blooded horse archer unit, which is really nice. One of the other changes you may notice in the upcoming patch is that we are going to be removing the Rohan siege weapons, and we're going to be replacing them with Gondor siege weapons, specifically the Gondor ballista and the catapult. One, this is a clever way to save slots, because of course we do have a couple of new factions to add, and there's a campaign going on. We have a whole bunch of ambitions for that, so we need to economize space where we can. And two, it just kind of makes a little bit more sense. Siege warfare, not really something that Rohan is big on, at least in our opinion. Maybe you disagree, but in any case, so they're going to be essentially renting the services of Gondorian siege engineers, and yeah. Makes sense, I think, with the flavor of the faction, and it saves us 2 slots that we can use for some cool new units to bring to you guys. So that's pretty well most of the big changes coming to Rohan. Let's take a look at some of the builds here that have opened up with this as a possibility. One of the things that I had in mind for Rohan when I was making some of the changes to their infantry was making a core of decently strong infantry, such as the Westmark Infantry. Gonna want the Windshield Maidens as well. Oh yeah, I think I forgot to mention that they lost numbers and AP, but they actually went up in damage. So now they're a flat baseline 8, and you can actually upgrade them to 9 damage. So once they use their ammunition, they are pretty solid fighters in melee as well. So overall, just the quality of Rohan's roster has, their infantry roster in any case, has kind of jumped up a fair amount. But they are quite low in number to balance that out. A little bit like the elves in that way. So yeah, a solid core of units like that. Maybe a couple units of Riddermark archers. Maybe a couple of mounted bowmen. Probably go with the cheaper ones so that you can fit a few more lancers in there. A couple of heavy lancers, HP lancers in fact. A few units of Riddermark cavalry there. Maybe go for a third. And then let's see, what else could you possibly fit in there? You could try and bring some units like the Westmark Spearmen. Definitely useful for supporting your cavalry and warding off enemy cavalry. And then you've got a little bit of extra money in there for one of the really nice units like the Red Shield Verkebrand, and then you got enough left over for another unit of Spearmen. So got a solid core of infantry, which is not bad at all, and got a lot of cavalry as well, a lot of lancers, which Rohan definitely specializes in. High numbers, high damage. Got a solid skirmishing core right there. There we go. I like to have everything in order. It bugs me otherwise. And some fairly strong elite infantry as well. The Westmark Infantry, that's 9 damage. That's pretty damn good. They're definitely the equivalent of Urukai in terms of raw stats, and they'll have a little bit better morale to boot. So that's kind of nice. Got some extra skirmishing power here in the form of the Riddermark archers, who, as I said, got a hell of a lot better. And the Windshield Maidens for dealing with any pesky units that get a bit too close to your cavalry. You can support them with these. If you didn't want to bring so many spearmen, and let's say you wanted to go with some melee cav, Rohan actually does have that available to them as well. A couple units there, the Riddermark skirmishers, and then your infantry corps is a little bit more exposed to, say, cavalry charges, but of course, your Rohan, you have a lot of options in that regard. Let's see, let's take a look at a siege army, potential siege army for Rohan. So you can bring yourself a nice little catapult there. Definitely going to want some Windshield Maidens, very strong in that kind of situation. Metal Celled Guard, I believe. Yes, they do. They have a nice little morale buff there, plus 10 to units around them, so very strong. You're going to want some units that you can use to storm checkpoints and do a fair amount of damage, so you got those there. In the form of the Westmark Infantry, and we're going to add a couple of units of Westmark Marshals to the mix as well. So solid infantry corps there so far. Skirmishers are incredibly important in that kind of situation, and your cavalry is going to be a little bit less important. So you can focus a bit more on your infantry, which is always fun. So Hornibrook Sentry is great for pushing. Riddermark Spearmen definitely have the morale, and the damage, I think, to be a useful pushing unit. You can use them to literally spearhead assaults. Rittermark Axemen with an attack upgrade, always nice to have around. And let's see, what else we got here? Another unit of Rittermark Axemen might not be unwelcome. And you can spend the rest of that money upgrading your units just a little bit. So it's an okay siege army there for Rohan. Decent amount of skirmishers, a little bit more infantry focused. But you do have the siege necessary to bust down battlements. We've got some solid mid-range skirmish in the form of Medicelled Guard, a couple units of Windshield Maidens, and some really nasty AP for battering your units. Now, one of the problems that this build is going to, or one of the problems it could potentially run into, is pike units, and Rohan does not really have a ton of answers to pikes. Now, you can save your shield maidens for that kind of eventuality, but pikes can be fairly numerous. So yeah, that is definitely something that this army would struggle with. That being said, you do have some pushing units, Hornibrook Sentries. They can shield wall. So can Rittermark Spearmen. You can use them to muscle your way in there, and yeah, and really start to push the line there if you run into a solid pike wall. Let's see. A rush army. Rohan, I would say, is definitely capable of that. I would probably take the Shield Maidens, a couple units of skirmishers. I might go a bit cheaper on the Horse Archers. Definitely want to bring some Rittermark Cavalry. They're very strong. You need some anti-cav here in the form, a little bit more anti-cav anyway, in the form of the Sons of Yorl. And we've already got the ladies. Let's see what else we can get here. A couple of Rittermark Archers can be useful in that kind of that regard. And then there you have it. 4 units of Rittermark Axemen, which makes a nice, solid rush army, which is maybe something that you're not going to expect Rohan to do to you. Although with all their cavalry, I'm certainly expecting them to move around a little bit, but solid infantry rush, maybe not so much. Now let's go to a build that's similar to one I've seen Kuro use in a couple of replays. And it was interesting. It had mixed results from what I saw, but you can definitely be very obnoxious with it. And that is a full Rohan infantry build, which, in my opinion, is more viable now than it ever was. So definitely want to take some knights, though, because they are strong. And maybe even a couple units of the Rittermark skirmishers, but I'd probably stop there. Windshield Maidens going to be useful. I've already got 3 units of Axemen. Don't necessarily need the Medicelled Guard. A couple units of archers there. Maybe we'll go entirely without archers, and we'll just leave that up to some of the cavalry. Yeah, Hornibrook Sentries will be nice. Could get rid of that. Maybe go for a couple of Horse Archer units instead. And you can use that to ward off melee cavalry fairly well. And then, what else do we want here? We've covered a lot of bases so far. Yeah, I got our couple units of these Westmark Marshals. Maybe what we'll do, go for a unit of riders at the fold in addition to all of that. Give you a little bit more skirmishing power. Definitely give that to the ladies. And you've got, take a look there, you've actually got a fair amount of damage on your infantry line. And some anti-cavalry options as well. Yeah, so Rohan's units are a little bit squishier, I think, than most of the Western factions, but they do have good damage. Most of the time they are quite speedy. And, yeah, their stats definitely rival their counterparts in, say, Gondor or elsewhere in the world, but they lack numbers in their infantry line. But they make up for that with some solid cavalry builds. And it has opened up a lot of possibilities for Rohan. Which I think is a good thing. It hasn't compromised their speciality, that being horsemen. They're still their best when they're playing with a lot of horsemen, but they do have the option to take some pretty decent regiments of infantry, which is something that they were previously lacking in. So that's all for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed it so far, and I hope you learned a lot from some of the direction, some of the stat breakdowns, and it's given you an idea of the direction that we want to take Rohan and to take the mod in general. So it's all really exciting, and I can't wait for you guys to get your hands on it. It's definitely going to be a few months, though, so thank you for waiting so patiently, and yeah, I hope this was useful for you. In any case, my name is Jordan, also known as J Monster. I'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye!